Okay, let's see. Yes, here we go. All right, and everybody can hear me okay. Um, Thank you. Just let me know if I get too soft or anything. Hope said that I would be, as I said in my description for the talk, looking at 5 humane farming myths. In typical fashion, I bit off a little more than I can chew, no pun intended. And so I don't. I'm much more comfortable behind a computer as a writer. So I don't do that many presentations like this. And then when I do, I tend to bite off more than I can chew and think I'll be able to get through more material than I can. So I ended up reorganizing my slideshow, my presentation last night to prioritize the issues the claims that I want to touch on most. And then if I end up having time, then I'll get to all 5 or maybe 4. But I'm going to try to push through 3, and the one that I ended up moving to last, just because I don't think I'll get to it, is the environmental claims that quote humane animal farming can be sustainable and eco-friendly and is even good for the environment if we get into regenerative grazing and all of that. I don't think I'll have time to get into that too much. I would dearly like to. Thankfully, Nassim yesterday got into some of that with the grazing, and then it looks like Vasily, the next speaker, will be focusing on environment. So I'm just going to try to push through and forgive my pace. I'm going to try to push through the ones that I wanted to touch on most, the claims that I wanted to touch on most. And so this first slide that you see here, so for a well-fed world, one of the campaigns that I manage is their Humane Facts campaign. And I was the primary writer and researcher on that campaign. And it's a website, and it is devoted to taking a closer look at humane animal farming claims, and then specifically at all of the different labels, this proliferation of labels that has popped up in the last few years as consumers, thankfully do become more aware of what's happening on quote factory farms, and are upset, rightly upset and concerned. And so all these different labels have popped up, and that website and campaign is devoted to looking at all of the different labels, what their standards are, what cruelties are still permitted, some of the hidden harms of these humane labels. And so at any time, if you want to learn more about any of the stuff that I'm talking about, I would encourage you to head over to humanefacts.org. We launched that website in 2015. We will be doing a big update of it this year. There are a few things that need updating, but I will continue to be working with that campaign. And so a few of the slides that you will see in here are just screenshots from the Humane Facts website, just to get through the first claim that I wanted to look at. And so for any of those, since I'm rushing through them a little bit, you can always hop over to humanefacts.org to learn more, and just click on the labels or the practices. So one of the first things that I wanted to say is if we start at just the level of definitions with the word humane, very quickly we can see what a deceptive approach, what deceptive and disingenuous framing this actually is, right? So these are just a few dictionary definitions of the word humane: having or showing compassion or benevolence, marked by compassion, sympathy, or consideration for humans or animals, characterized by tenderness, compassion, and sympathy for people and animals, especially for the suffering or distressed, and then for acting in a manner that causes the least harm to people or animals. So just keep those definitions in mind, as we talk about some of this a little more. We're living in a time where I feel like it's never been more painfully clear that language is not only a tool, but it can be used as a weapon, and words mean something. And so we really have to pay attention to how language and rhetoric are being used to manipulate us and to cause harm. And I think that the humane farming movement, the humane animal farming movement, is a perfect and really scary example of that. So, okay, so I think the first thing that we run into, if we keep those definitions in mind, is that, quote, humane animal farming is an unavoidable paradox. And so you'll see that some of my slides, a lot of my slides are just little bits of text like this. As I get used to doing more PowerPoint presentations, I'll learn how to do presenter notes. Some of these are for my benefit more than for yours, so just bear with me if I hope it's not too tedious. You don't have to just stare at the text. I suppose you could look at my face. But the unavoidable paradox, right? If we get down to the level of definitions and what's being claimed, proponents of so-called humane meat and animal farming generally confront an unavoidable paradox. The movement to treat farmed animals better, humanely, is based on the idea that it is wrong to subject them to unnecessary harm. But killing animals we have no need to eat constitutes the ultimate act of unnecessary harm. So right there, just at the level of definitions. Why is it unnecessary harm? Some of you may have had the privilege to listen to Dr. Michaela Carlson speak yesterday as part of this conference, focused on this idea that some people just need meat. And I'm not talking about, certain illnesses or disorders that make it hard to digest or obtain all of your nutrients from vegetables. I'm talking about this trend of, bio-individual nutritional needs, intuitive nutritional needs, that is basically, I've heard a nutritionist, several, frame it as permissive omnivorism. We just say, well, my body tells me that I need a little, wild caught fish or eggs to be okay. So I'm not going to be vegan. In reality, the human species has no requirement for animal products for health. We are omnivores, and people say that a lot to defend animal farming. We're omnivores, but omnivore does not mean must consume some animal products. Omnivore means capable of consuming or obtaining nutrients from both plants and animals. Omnivory evolved not as a biological imperative, but as an opportunistic strategy to aid in survival when food was scarce. So no, your teeny canine teeth do not make you a meat eater. So while the idea that some people just need meat or animal protein sells plenty of books and it caters to entrenched palate preferences, nutritional requirements in terms of which nutrients are actually needed are not variable within species. So just touching again on what Dr. Carlson said yesterday, and she has a great article on this that goes into it more in depth that she allowed us to reprint at Free From Harm. I'm happy to post links to some of this stuff in the comments or on the Facebook Live when I'm done. But each species has its own specific nutritional requirements. This is across species, and all members of each species require the exact same nutrients. The variability occurs in the amounts needed, not in which nutrients are needed themselves. So when people say, oh, well, I just need meat, I just need a little dairy, that's not how nutritional requirements work. As nutritional epidemiologist, Dr. Michaela Carlson observes in her article, this is the one I was referring to, do different people need radically different diets? Human beings are one species. We are all the same animal with the same digestive physiology. And as is true of all species, we do not require personalized nutritional programs unless we are dealing with a specific disease or some other very unusual condition. Where nutrition is concerned, it's helpful to ask yourself, where in nature can I find an example of this? And in this example of a very wide variation of nutrient intake, the answer is nowhere. In other words, you'll be hard-pressed to stumble upon horses that do better with some meat in their diet because of their blood type, or bears that need twice the protein intake of other bears. Our species has specific nutritional requirements, and we can meet them by eating whole plant foods in sufficient quantity to maintain healthy body weight. So I just go back to that again, because when I talk about unnecessary harm, and the inherent paradox of inflicting unnecessary harm and death on animals and calling it humane. That's why it's unnecessary. We don't need to be consuming these animals or their products at all. Um, so when we have plentiful access to plant-based foods and a choice between sparing life or taking it, there is nothing remotely humane about rejecting compassion and choosing violence and death for others just because we like the taste of their flesh and because they cannot fight back. Might does not equal right. So this is my one slide that apparently didn't come through. I'm not going to bother to try and bring up a different one now. But this was the first claim. For the sake of time, I ended up trying to combine the first two claims, which are animals on humane farms have happy lives and natural lives. I realized that I needed to push through some of this, so I combined happy and natural, and I'm going to move through this one just pretty quickly. Just again, at the level of the definition, if we're talking about happy lives, natural lives, the following abuses and mutilations are routine practice on humane farms and are even permitted under many third-party audited humane labels. Hope talked about some of those third-party auditing labels. There are so many different humane labels and certifications that you can get now and find on food. And again, that's what I spent a lot of time researching for humanefacts.org. If you want to look at some of these specific labels, certified humane, animal welfare approved, global animal partnership, so on and so forth, and what cruelties, what abuses they actually permit in the fine print, then we break that down at the website. So these next few slides are just screenshots from some of the pages that go into practices that are permitted under these humane labels, and I just want to look at them quickly when we're thinking about happy lives and natural lives. I would say that none of these practices could be considered happy or natural by any stretch of the imagination. Castration without anesthetic or painkiller is widely permitted. It's always done on industrial farms, but many small and humane label farms permit castration of animals without any anesthesia as well. Branding. So again, all of these are permitted on some of these humane label farms. Dehorning and disbudding. Again, without anesthesia, hot iron, pressed into the sensitive nerve tissue. Ear notching, cutting out pieces of their sensitive ears to mark them as property, also permitted. Debeaking. Hope showed you some photos yesterday of these quote free range and cage free egg farms, which are in fact often just massive warehouses with the birds crammed inside. That is not a natural way for them to live, and under severe stress they will peck at each other and cause injury, and so they are debeaked, and their beaks are very sensitive like our fingertips. So also permitted. Nose ringing. So pastured pigs who get to spend time outdoors, their number one primal instinct is to root in the earth. It brings them a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction, but it tears up the soil, and so on many quote humane pig farms, they have these rings put into their noses, and not only is it painful physically, but it's psychologically painful. It thwarts one of their strongest drives. So again, happy, natural, I would say no. Okay, this got cut off a little bit, but this was just to say, abuses aside, with dairy, this is for dairy, there is nothing natural about dairy. There is nothing natural about farming mothers. There's nothing natural about reproductive subjugation. There's nothing natural at a basic level about stealing baby food made for baby animals of another species. There's nothing natural about consuming breast milk past early childhood, period, much less from another species. And yet dairy is all wrapped up in these natural claims and the happy cow claim. Nothing natural about it. Same with eggs. This is an image of something Justin could tell you a great deal about, and he may talk about, probably will in his presentation later today, Justin Van Cleek. There's nothing natural about eggs. Chickens, and many of you may know this already, were domesticated from red jungle fowl in Asia years and years and years ago, and their wild and still living ancestors laid eggs, only maybe 10 to 20 eggs a year, once or twice a year during breeding season for the purposes of reproducing, just like any other bird lays eggs. And we have so manipulated their reproduction through selective breeding in order to get them to overproduce eggs, that even the, quote, happiest hens and the heritage breed hens, I mean, just pop into any backyard chicken farm. It's a nightmare. I guarantee you will see pictures like this, all these so-called heritage breeds. Even the happiest hens are, many of them, if not most, are subject to these reproductive diseases that will cause them great illness, if not death, very early in life, much earlier than would be natural. And this all stems from our Frankensteinian genetic hijacking of the reproductive systems in order to coerce this overproduction of eggs. What you see in this picture kills so many hens that are used for egg laying, even if they're rescued from egg farms. And it's their bodies are constantly overproducing these eggs, and so oftentimes eggs will build up inside of them and just begin to cook. And so there's a reason that looks like, kind of scrambled egg material, and it ends up killing a lot of them. So you can Google egg yolk peritonitis or, quote, lash egg, and you will see just tons of photos like this of postmortems of what killed the chickens, and they open them up and they are just full of all of this overproduced egg material. So there's nothing natural about it. Even if you do have a heritage breed hen, these animals are their reproductive systems and their production of so many eggs is the result of years and years of exploitation and selective breeding to get them to overproduce. And there's just nothing natural about it. So yeah, sorry for that. And also, as people are becoming more aware of, male chicks at hatcheries, including the hatcheries that supply humane egg farms, male chicks are killed. They are thrown in giant macerators that grind them up alive, or they're thrown in dumpsters or trash bags to suffocate. Nothing happy or natural about it. And this is a picture from Triangle Chicken Advocates, their micro sanctuary, Justin Van Cleek's micro sanctuary. And this was just to say, the natural habitat of chickens is actually the forest and the trees. And so you'll hear these claims on some of these pastured egg farms, like, oh, they have a natural environment, but actually throwing chickens out in the middle of a field without any trees makes them feel exposed to predators. So their natural habitat is actually a forest. And I point to that just as one more way that these terms are misused deliberately to manipulate people into feeling okay about exploiting these animals. So the next claim that I wanted to look at, and can everybody still hear me okay? Somebody let me know in the comments if you need me to put my headset in. The next claim that I wanted to look at, thank you. Animals on humane farms have humane deaths. Thank you, Stacy. Animals on humane farms have humane deaths, good deaths, peaceful deaths. We hear that all the time. So here's a quote from Hope Bohannick's book that I love. There can be no such thing as happy meat. Meat is dead. It has no emotion. However, it came from a living, breathing, sentient being who had the capacity for happiness. One assumes that this is what the folks who use this term mean, that the living animal, before he became a piece of meat, was happy. But this just perpetuates the fatal flaw in the entire concept of eating animals and animal products. One day soon, no matter how happy the animal is, she will be dead, and no sentient being is happy to be killed. So all of these slides, and I promise you, I didn't choose any bloody or overly graphic ones. I mean, this feels very upsetting to see, but there is a photographer. I've put the name down there at the bottom, um, an activist who specializes in going into quote humane animal farms and taking pictures, getting permission to take pictures. Humane slaughter classes goes to a lot of those and photographs these high welfare, right, deaths. And as you can see, they are anything but. And so all of the photos that I have included in this section are from humane slaughter classes, or just animals being killed on a quote humane farm. And the photographer received permission to take these, so they weren't even trying to hide anything. Hope has mentioned before, and mentions in her book how, even if it was a peaceful death, which clearly this is not, to be pinned down and restrained by someone that you trust. The on so-called humane farms, the producers claim to love their animals and treat them like family. They even have names, and to have formed this bond. But there is a sense in which it is an even greater injustice than to be suddenly on this one bad day pinned to the ground and restrained and have your throat slit by someone you trusted. Um, so so again, just another way that this language, a humane death, a good death, is manipulative and deceptive and dishonest. This is from a humane slaughter class here in Asheville, where I live. And Justin Van Cleek and I both worked on a campaign to protest these quote, humane slaughter workshops. And, with this sheep, this is one of the slaughter instructors. They actually frame and advertise this class as honoring the animals, and participants at where this photo was taken would have been standing around this sheep being pinned down and restrained by the person that he trusted. Participants would have been standing around in a circle saying thank you. So yeah, there's nothing happy going on for this animal right now. Again, from a humane slaughter demonstration. And I just show these again to point out how insidious this messaging is, how disingenuous. And I encourage anyone, if anyone happens to be watching who does consume, quote, humane animal products, or who's thinking about it, go to the Unparalleled Suffering Photography Facebook page, and just click on photos. I was going through them again last night. He focuses so much on this humane stuff, on humane slaughter. I challenge anyone to look through those photos or go to the website and tell me that this is a good thing, an ethical thing, a humane thing. So that's the last one I'll show, from another humane slaughter demonstration. And I think that these speak for themselves. So I pushed the environmental stuff to the end, and if I have time, I'll get to it. If not, maybe for another day, if I get comfortable enough doing these talks. So instead, I moved this claim up because it's more important to me to talk about right now in this limited time. This claim that we hear so often, that humane farming is the opposite of factory farming, or meaningfully different from factory farming. Humane farming, ethical meat, is the ethical alternative and the ethical resistance to factory farming. They are always positioned as these two ideologically opposed, and opposed in practice systems. And so I'd like to look at that claim more. So vegans who extend their activism to oppose, quote, humane animal farming and slaughter are often criticized by the ethical meat crowd who say, hey, why don't you focus on factory farming? That's the real enemy. We're on your side. And so, although proponents like to position humane farming and slaughter as the ethical alternative to factory farming, quote, factory farming, and the horrors of industrial killing, the truth is that small scale and so called humane farming and slaughter operations actually entrench and perpetuate the worst commercial practices. Humane farming entrenches and supports factory farming. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit more. The main reason that abuse and torture of animals happens on commercial farms, on factory farms, is not because factory farming is corrupt, which it is. It is not because big ag execs are greedy, which they are, or because factory farm workers are often desensitized. They necessarily are, though all of these are factors. The most important reason that abuse and torture of farmed animals happens is that consumers, including humane meat and dairy consumers, are sending the message that it is morally acceptable to exploit and kill animals for profit and palate pleasure. Animals we have no need to harm at all. That is the message that humane consumers and producers are sending. You cannot inflict or pay people to inflict unnecessary violence on animals and then make the case that those animals should not experience unnecessary suffering. It is a morally inconsistent and therefore ignorable position, one that it is easy for producers and most consumers to dismiss. And this is one reason that humane will always remain a niche sector. Because if animals' lives don't even matter enough for us to spare them when we have ample access to plentiful alternatives, on what grounds could their suffering possibly be said to matter? You can't say animals are trash and then argue that they shouldn't be treated like trash. So no matter how small, family farm, organic, local, pasture raised, certified humane, welfare approved, blah, 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 animal agriculture, the systematic farming of sentient beings and individuals, the farming of living beings, is at its core based on the grossest devaluing of life. When you maintain that an animal's dearest wish for continued existence and its entire potential lifetime of meaningful experiences are worth less than the non-essential taste of bacon, hamburger, or cheese, when you maintain that animals should actually be killed for these fleeting and replaceable pleasures, despite an abundance of alternatives, you are saying, in effect, these animals are trash. You, the humane consumer, are saying that these animals are trash. The only logical outcome is that you will then see animals being treated like trash. So this is the kind of scene that, quote, humane consumers and producers would decry and say that they are resisting. They are entrenching this. They are saying that animals are trash. So this is what will always happen. As long as we are willing to treat sentient individuals as units of production and numb ourselves to the fact that we are inflicting gratuitous violence and death, we are doing nothing more than reifying the basic precepts of factory farming, that animals' lives have no intrinsic worth and that it is okay to exploit and kill them even when doing so is completely unnecessary to our survival. Humane animal farming is, at its core, conceptually trashing animals. Factory farming, the abuses that humane consumers and producers decry, you see them being literally trashed. You see the dumpsters full of piglets and calves, but this is the seed of that. You conceptually trash the animal, they will be trashed. You are supporting that system by participating in it. As historian James McWilliams has written, supporting alternatives to the industrial production of animal products serves the ultimate interests of industrial producers. The decision to eat animal products sourced from small, local, and sustainable farms might seem like a fundamental rejection of big business as usual. It is, however, an implicit but powerful confirmation of the single most critical behavior necessary to the perpetuation of factory farming: eating animals. So long as consumers continue to eat meat, eggs, and dairy, even if they are sourced from small farms practicing the highest welfare and safety standards, they are providing, however implicitly, an endorsement of the products that big agriculture will always be able to produce more efficiently and cheaply and thus dominate. So you're not just ideologically entrenching factory farming when you participate in, quote, humane farming, you're economically entrenching it. This is James McWilliams again. In all my thinking and writing about meat production, there is no point I believe more strongly than this one. As long as we eat meat, factory farms will be the dominant mode of production. In other words, as long as humans deem it culturally acceptable to consume animal flesh, that is, as long as eating meat is an act that's not considered taboo, factory farms will continue to proliferate. The reason for this strikes me as intuitive. An unfettered demand for meat, in conjunction with basic human choice, provides political, technological, and scientific incentive to produce meat as efficiently as possible. Unless you have a plan to displace capitalism, density of production will rule and billions of animals will suffer. And finally, to quote my friend and colleague Justin Van Cleek again, from here he was reflecting on our work to oppose some of these humane slaughter workshops and the pushback that we were getting. Hey, you guys, we're on your side, from the ethical meat crowd. Hey, guys, go fight factory farming. We're on the same side. So this was his response: just as we should not stroll past our neighbor kicking his dog on our way to a puppy mill protest, we should not overlook the terrible violence happening on small, humane, family, sustainable farms for the sake of fighting factory farming. We have just as much moral obligation to that one sheep or those few hens in the yard next door as we do to the billions of individuals crammed into cages, crates, and sheds. I thought that was really well put. So to recap, factory farming and humane farming do not represent two different ideological sides in a struggle of right versus wrong. They are two sides of the same exploitative, violent coin, and they are mutually reinforcing. Supporting humane farming supports factory farming. And this is just a quick little, just to get us thinking about this a little more, what values you're supporting. When humane and factory farming are set up as ideologically opposed, let's look at the values that one supports and see if the other one doesn't support it. So we can start by, noting our violence toward animals always begins with a value judgment. So, judgment. It's okay to treat bodies as commodities. Both say yes. This is a picture, again, from a humane chicken farm, humane chicken slaughter. It's okay to treat some lives as property. From a small local humane slaughterhouse. Again, these are from Unparalleled Suffering Photography, who focuses on humane slaughter, documenting it. Judgment. It's okay to hurt/kill others for profit. This little guy's getting marked as property and has a spiked weaning nose ring in his nose to prevent him drinking his mama's milk. Judgment. It's okay to kill others for pleasure. I don't even remember this woman's name. She's one of the gazillion, John Sanbonmatsu brilliantly spoke about the rise of the femivore yesterday. This is one of, these women who left her city job and became a humane butcher and proudly poses for photo shoots like this, because bacon, right? Yum. Judgment. It's okay to steal babies from mothers. Animals are families. Judgment. It's okay to exploit and oppress others based on difference. So somehow we're actually not really seeing much difference ideologically between humane farming and factory farming. And yet, so much is made from the ethical meat movement to make this distinction. Um, Violence and exploitation are okay if they have been done for thousands of years. Well, both humane farming and factory farming support this idea, support this value. It's morally acceptable to restrain and forcibly inseminate others for profit. These are individuals. It's morally acceptable to invade and control others' reproductive systems. Humane farming says yes. Factory farming says yes. These photos, the indignities and degradations that we subject these animals to in the name of farming, whether it's humane farming or factory farming, they are inherently inhumane. So much indignity. So, humane farming and factory farming both reproduce oppressive power structures. They both entrench the notion of might makes right. They both entrench discrimination based on difference. They both normalize entitlement and ownership mentality. They both conceptually trash animals, which sanctions their literal trashing. They both promote discriminatory values that naturalize a hierarchy of dominion and supremacy, values that are fundamentally at odds with anti-oppression and moral progress. Designating others as property is the root violence that they share in common. And I love this quote so much. I always read it when I do give a talk. Harboring the idea of owning another living being is in itself an act of violence. And our outer violence toward non-human animals, which is so devastating to us all, springs from this idea. The vegan ideal of compassion for all life has at its core this same idea that we are never owners of others. We can be their guardians, companions, friends, protectors, admirers, and appreciators, and this blesses us far more than we might think. The move from owner to guardian frees both the owners and the owned and establishes the foundation for peace, freedom, and justice. We are all harmed by the culturally mandated ownership mentality that reduces beings to mere commodities, whether for food, clothing, entertainment, or the myriad of other uses. It is long past time for us to awaken from the cultural trance of owning our fellow beings. And these pictures, I think, are just, again, from unparalleled suffering photography. It is long past time to move past the cultural trance of owning our fellow beings. Humane farming is not doing anything to oppose factory farming. It is reinforcing this idea that we can be owners of others. Other lives can be property. Bodies are not commodities, but humane farming says they are. Is that really a message that you want to get on board with? Champion best udder. A last thing I wanted to touch on, when self-identified progressives reject factory farming but embrace, quote, humane farming. To degrade another being to the status of property a commodity whose death is prefigured for profit, whose life is glibly affixed with a premature slaughterhouse expiration date as obscene as the plastic ear tags marking her body as owned. Not only is it a violence to inflict this indignity on other individuals, this systematic debasement reproduces the same oppressive power structures that have facilitated every other form of discrimination most of us now recognize as injustice. If we look at the various social justice causes that most self-identified progressives currently support, many of these causes are working to dismantle forms of oppression that are based on the idea that some bodies are less than. Racism, sexism, heterosexism, transphobia, ethnocentrism, ableism, sizeism, all of these forms of discrimination devalue and oppress others on the basis of the bodies they were born into. When the mechanism of the oppressions you progressives are fighting is the idea that some bodies are less than, what sense does it make to endorse this ideology elsewhere? To reject forms of oppression that are based on the color, gender identity, sexual orientation, size, ethnicity, or ability of a body, while simultaneously endorsing the oppression of other bodies based on their species, is morally inconsistent, ideologically incoherent, and counterproductive to true and meaningful anti-oppression work. And I love this quote from the writer Chris Sosa. The exploitation of animals by humans is a stunning example of progressive deference to the normalcy of oppression. A serious anti-oppression movement can't have the bodies and byproducts of exploited beings on its plate while claiming moral superiority. If we continue to exploit animals while protesting oppression, then the conservatives are right about us. We are a movement of hypocrites. Bodies are not commodities. If you are humanely producing animals, humanely consuming animals, you are saying bodies are commodities. So, what is humane farming? Just in my last couple minutes here, Justin mentioned yesterday at the end, at the wrap up, so at Free From Harm, one of the nonprofits that I write for, we have a campaign that called Sowing Change. We've made it its own website, which is newfarming.org, which you can see up here. And we profile the many farmers who are now, many of them former, quote, humane farmers, former humane meat farmers, dairy farmers, egg farmers, who woke up and said, I was living a lie, and they went vegan. And many of them have also transitioned to growing vegetables and produce instead. So this is a quote from one of those farmers. For me, and she was a dairy farmer, she was a humane dairy farmer. For me, there is now a very clear distinction between humane and inhumane farming. Humane farming is cultivating a plant-based diet. Inhumane farming is breeding any sentient being for production and consumption. This is our most recent farmer that we profiled. And although I probably don't have time to get too much into the environmental section I wanted to, this farmer was a, quote, regenerative grazer. And so the regenerative grazing movement is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but I'll just quickly, I see I have like 5 minutes left. I'll pop back to this in a second. So this was if I was going to have time for my sustainable environmental claim. Regenerative grazing is sort of the face of that right now, of the pushback. I call it the humane shell game. regenerative grazing is at the center right now. And it's just one of the many ways that the quote humane farming movement, ethical meat crowd, deflects and fixates on, well, here's how we'll spin the messaging now to say that eating animals we have no need to harm is okay. The latest, the most popular way to do that right now is regenerative grazing. And they say that it makes eating animals ethical if you graze them in this certain way that they claim will reverse climate change and save the world, thanks to Alan Savory and his disciples. So, but their claims are based on this idea that once upon a time in many ecosystems there were these native hooved ungulate herbivores, bison and elk, whose trampling of the soil provided an important ecosystem service that preserved the integrity of that ecosystem and kept the environment at optimal levels, at an optimal state. And that now that we no longer have a lot of those native ungulates, and gee, I wonder where they went, like the bison and the elk, that what we can do instead is just inject a large population of captive, non-native, domesticated cattle, and that they will precisely mimic the trampling hoof action of those ancient ungulates, and basically restore ecosystems and reverse climate change and create carbon sinks and stuff about soil microbes. And so that's how they're spinning. So that makes, they claim, killing cattle and eating them, if they are regeneratively grazed in this certain way, then it makes meat ethical. Never mind that if it really was the case that we had no other native ungulates that we could reintroduce into these ecosystems that supposedly need these animals and their hoof action, if we didn't have those, and we had to rely on cattle to restore ecosystems, that doesn't mean you have to kill them and eat them. So I wanted to get into that more in a little more nuance. I don't have time, but I do want to say the last farmer that we just profiled at newfarming.org, this guy Jay Wild, he was one of those regenerative grazers. And so he went vegan. He had a crisis of conscience. He was a humane beef and dairy farmer for years, grew up. His father was a farmer, a cattle farmer. And so what he has said, he turned over his last herd. He went vegan. There's been a beautiful short film made about him called 73 Cows. If you go to Free From Harm, we feature the film in our article about him. But you can also just look up 73 Cows. But he has said he sent his last herd to sanctuary, but he has said part of his grasslands, that he kept some cattle there. They will now live out their lives there on a sort of micro sanctuary. He is changing his farm over to veganic vegetable production, but is keeping a few of those cattle from his last herd there, just to live out their lives and do whatever this regenerative grazing business is. And so this idea that grazing cattle a certain way somehow makes eating them and killing them ethical, I think he's a great example just to point out, if their claims are true, even if their claims were true, and we have no other recourse except to cattle to restore these ecosystems, that doesn't mean that doesn't make killing them and eating them ethical. So, okay, yes, am I missing? Thank you, Fireweed, for posting those links. That was okay. I got through most of it okay. I'm still learning. Thank you for bearing with me. I'll just stop there. Bodies are not commodities. And if you're comfortable with that message, I would think about it a little more carefully. What you're really endorsing, and what side of history you're coming down on. If you're not comfortable with that message, then supporting this idea of quote humane animal exploitation doesn't work. So words mean something, And this humane animal farming movement claims to be one of integrity. If any of you are watching, humane, producers or consumers, at least, if nothing else, have the integrity to stop using language in this way that glorifies violence and celebrates killing, and frames it as something virtuous, um, because it's very harmful, and it's dishonest. So, all right, thank you guys. Sorry if I went over.
It's actually perfect. Perfect, Ashley. Really amazing presentation. So great. The comments are just off the hook. People are really loving what you had to say. And thank you so, so much, Ashley.
Thank
You're
you.
amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Um,
If anybody, feel free to email me if you want links to anything. You can. I think my easiest email to remember is just, I'll type it here. info@milkhurts.org. You can also find me at Free from Harm and A Well-Fed World if you go to their websites. Thank you,
awesome.
guys.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so
All right.
much. Great
Bye
job.
bye.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.